I stepped out of my car, exhausted after a 12-hour shift, only to find my garage door blocked again. The sleek white SUV, the same one I had warned her about a dozen times, sat smugly in my driveway like an entitled guest overstaying their welcome. The worst part? It was pouring rain, my dinner had gone cold on the passenger seat, and I knew exactly whose car it was. Karen. My neighbor. The bane of my existence. I took a deep breath, telling myself not to explode. Maybe, just maybe, this time she had made a mistake. Maybe she was inside, waiting to move it, apologetic for the inconvenience. But no, her house was dark, silent, as if mocking me. My patience, already worn thin from weeks of her nonsense, snapped. I knocked on her door, a firm, deliberate knock that meant business. I could hear movement inside, the shuffling of feet, and then finally, the door swung open. Karen stood there in pink satin pajamas, holding a glass of wine as if she had just been disturbed from a luxurious evening. "Oh, it's you," she said, her tone carrying the same enthusiasm one might have for a telemarketer. I gestured toward the SUV blocking my garage. "Karen, your car is in my driveway." Again. She took a sip of her wine, completely unbothered. "Yeah, I know. I had some groceries, and I was tired, so I just left it there. I'll move it in the morning." My brain short-circuited. I had dealt with inconsiderate people before, but this level of entitlement was something else. "No. You're moving it now." Karen blinked at me as if I had just suggested she set her car on fire. "Jake, don't be so uptight. It's just a car. What's the big deal?" The big deal? The big deal was that this was the 5th time this month. The big deal was that I had given her enough warnings, and she was acting like I was the unreasonable one. The big deal was that I paid a mortgage on this house and deserved to park in my own damn garage. "You don't own my driveway, Karen. Move it." She huffed dramatically, rolling her eyes so hard I was surprised they didn't get stuck. "Fine. But you don't have to be such a jerk about it." I stood there, drenched from the rain, watching as she lazily strolled back inside, grabbed her keys at an agonizingly slow pace, and finally moved the car, only to park it halfway onto my lawn instead. Before I could even open my mouth, she shot me a condescending smile and slammed her front door shut. I clenched my jaw, knowing this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I found out exactly how not over it was. I woke up, grabbed my coffee, and walked outside to find not just her SUV in my driveway, but a second car, a guest's car, both completely blocking my garage. My fingers tightened around my coffee mug. This was intentional. A clear message. I stormed over, knocking hard this time, but Karen didn't even answer. Instead, she shouted from inside, "Busy? Try later." Try later? Was she serious? I called the police, but the response was less than helpful. "It's private property, sir. Unless she's outright trespassing inside your home, there's not much we can do." I felt my eye twitch. "So, you're telling me she can keep parking here, and I can't do anything?" "Well, you could have her towed," the officer suggested. Now there was an idea. I called a tow company, eager to put an end to this madness, but just as they arrived, Karen rushed outside, feigning shock and horror. "Oh my God, Jake! Are you seriously towing my car? Over a tiny parking issue?" "This is not tiny, Karen," I said through gritted teeth. "You're blocking my garage." "Relax," she scoffed. "I was just about to move it." The tow truck driver looked between us, clearly realizing he had stepped into the middle of a neighborhood soap opera. "Look, I can tow it, but if she moves it now, it'll save you the trouble." I exhaled, not wanting to deal with more drama. "Move it, Karen." With a smug little smirk, she took her time getting into her car, making a whole show of adjusting her seat, fixing her mirror, and finally pulling out like she was on a slow Sunday drive. The second her car was gone, I walked back inside, knowing this wasn't the victory I wanted. I needed to outthink her. The next day, I installed a security camera pointing directly at my driveway. If she tried this again, I would have proof. But Karen, being the expert-level nuisance she was, found a new way to escalate. That evening, I came home to something worse than before. Her SUV was parked inside my garage. My garage. She had somehow gotten inside and parked there as if it was her personal space. I was beyond words. My fists clenched, my blood pressure skyrocketed, and my vision blurred with rage. I could feel a meltdown bubbling inside me, the kind of frustration that makes people write angry Yelp reviews in all caps. I stormed next door, barely containing myself. This time I didn't knock. I pounded. Karen opened the door, chewing gum like she had all the time in the world. "Hey, Jake." My nostrils flared. "You parked in my garage." She shrugged. "Yeah, so? You weren't using it." My fingers twitched. "That is not how property works, Karen." She crossed her arms, fully embracing her villain arc. "Well, if you're so mad about it, call the cops." "Oh wait, they won't do anything." "Guess you're stuck with me." I could actually feel my sanity slipping. She was right. The cops wouldn't help, and towing services weren't legally allowed to remove cars from inside garages. She had found a loophole in the system, and she was exploiting it to the fullest. I stepped back, inhaling deeply, forcing my brain to cool down. She thought she had won. She thought I was out of options. She had no idea who she was messing with. Because at that moment I decided, if she wanted to play dirty, I'd play dirtier. The next time she parked in my garage, she wouldn't have a car left to move. I sat in my living room, staring at the security footage of Karen's SUV sitting comfortably inside my garage like it had signed a lease. My frustration had evolved beyond simple irritation. It had become a personal mission. She had played the system perfectly, knowing full well that the police wouldn't intervene, that the tow company had no legal right to remove a car from inside a private garage, and that no reasonable person would escalate things beyond a verbal confrontation. But she had made one crucial mistake. She assumed I was a reasonable person. I spent the next few hours researching every possible angle. I scoured parking laws, trespassing regulations, and property rights, looking for any loophole that could work in my favor. The solution came to me in a late-night caffeine-fueled revelation. Abandoned vehicles. The city had clear guidelines on what constituted an abandoned car, and while they usually referred to cars left on public property, there was enough ambiguity in the wording to work with. If a vehicle was left on private property without consent for an extended period, it could be reported as abandoned. From there, the owner had a limited window to reclaim it before it was either towed or, in extreme cases, scrapped. The plan was forming in my mind, but I needed an accomplice. Enter Frank, the guy who owned the local junkyard. I had met him years ago when I needed some parts for an old motorcycle project, and I remembered him as the kind of guy who loved a good underdog story. When I explained my situation over the phone, he burst out laughing so hard I had to hold the receiver away from my ear. Once he composed himself, he gave me the rundown. If I could provide documentation proving the car had been left on my property without permission, he could acquire it legally. He didn't need much. Just some kind of paper trail that would make it look like the car was abandoned and unwanted. I spent the next day crafting the perfect document. I mocked up a fake tow notice, complete with city letterhead, citing repeated unauthorized parking violations as the reason for removal. It wasn't entirely illegal, just stretching the truth to fit my needs. Then, I printed out a formal-looking notice of abandonment, claiming that if the car was not moved within 24 hours, it would be subject to disposal. That night, I walked over to Karen's house and taped the notice to her door. If she saw it and moved her car, fine. But if she ignored it, I had my excuse. Predictably, she ignored it. The next morning, I woke up early, barely able to contain my excitement. I called Frank, and within the hour, a tow truck was rolling down my street. I watched with giddy satisfaction as they hooked Karen's SUV up and dragged it out of my garage like an exorcism was being performed. I felt a sense of justice wash over me. But the real fun began when Karen realized what had happened. I had barely settled into my couch with a celebratory cup of coffee when I heard the blood-curdling shriek from outside. I didn't rush to the door. I took my time, savoring every moment. When I finally stepped outside, I found Karen pacing frantically in front of her empty garage, her phone clutched in her hand like it was a lifeline. The second she saw me, her expression turned from panic to fury. "Where is my car?" she demanded, her voice hitting a pitch that probably startled birds 3 blocks away. I took a casual sip of my coffee. "Oh, that? It was towed. There was a notice on your door. You must have missed it." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You can't do that. That was my property. And this is my garage," I replied, gesturing toward the now empty space. "You left your car on private property. According to city regulations, abandoned vehicles can be removed." She was already dialing. "I'm calling the police." I nodded. "You should. Maybe they'll explain property laws to you." Minutes later, 2 officers arrived. Karen wasted no time launching into her dramatic performance, painting me as some unhinged lunatic who had stolen her car in a fit of rage. The officers turned to me for an explanation, and I calmly handed them the documents. I watched their expressions shift from irritation to mild amusement as they skimmed the paperwork. One officer turned to Karen. "Ma'am, it looks like there was proper notice given." Karen's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. "But it wasn't abandoned. He knew it was mine." One officer sighed. "The issue here is that it was parked inside his property without permission. This isn't a criminal matter. You'll have to take it up with the tow company." Karen looked like she was about to explode. "Where's my car?" I shrugged. "Oh, I think it was taken to a junkyard. Might want to hurry before they start stripping it for parts." She went pale. I could almost hear the gears in her head screeching to a halt as reality set in. She spun on her heel, storming toward her house while furiously calling someone. I stood there, taking in the victory, but I knew it wasn't over yet. Karen wasn't the type to let something like this go. A few hours later, she was back on my porch, banging on my door so hard I thought she might break it down. When I opened it, she jabbed a finger in my face. "You're going to pay for this," she hissed. I tilted my head. "Am I?" "I spoke to my lawyer," she snapped. "You had no right to remove my car. I'm suing you." I crossed my arms. "Go ahead. Let's see how well that holds up in court when I show the judge all the security footage of you trespassing in my garage." "Oh, and the cops already said it's not a criminal case, so good luck with that." She faltered, her bravado cracking just a little. I could tell she hadn't expected me to be so prepared. But Karen, being Karen, wasn't about to admit defeat. "I'll get my car back," she muttered. "And when I do, you better watch yourself." I smiled. "I'll be watching. With my new security cameras." She stormed off, slamming her door so hard it rattled my windows. I leaned against the frame, feeling a satisfaction unlike anything I had ever felt before. Karen thought she was untouchable, that she could bend the rules to her liking. But she had underestimated just how far I was willing to go. She wanted a war. I had just won the first battle. The silence that followed Karen's retreat was the sweetest sound I had heard in weeks. I stood in my doorway, taking in the peace, knowing full well it wouldn't last. Karen was many things, entitled, manipulative, infuriating, but most of all she was persistent. She wasn't going to let this go. She had been humiliated, her car was gone, and she had no way to get it back without jumping through legal hoops. But knowing her, she would rather throw herself into a pit of fire than admit she had lost. The next morning, I woke up to an army of passive-aggressive Facebook posts. Karen had taken to social media, spinning the story in the most dramatic way possible. According to her version, I was an unstable, bitter man who had maliciously stolen her car out of jealousy. Jealousy of what, exactly, she didn't specify. She posted long, rambling paragraphs about how she was just a hard-working single woman trying to live her life in peace, only to be harassed by a vindictive psycho. She conveniently left out the part where she had repeatedly parked in my garage like she was paying rent for it. As expected, her friends, mostly other Karens from various online groups, rushed to her defense. The comments section was a battlefield of outrage and misplaced victimhood. They encouraged her to go to the media, sue me for damages, and even suggested staging a public protest. I should have been worried, but instead I laughed. Because in the middle of all this nonsense, something unexpected happened. People from our neighborhood started commenting. And they weren't on her side. A neighbor 2 houses down mentioned how Karen had blocked their driveway multiple times. Another person brought up the time she threw a fit at the HOA meeting because she didn't like the color of someone's fence. Someone else recalled how she had once called the cops on a group of kids for selling lemonade too close to her house. Within hours, her post had backfired spectacularly. Instead of rallying support, she had opened the floodgates for every person she had ever wronged. By noon, she had deleted the post. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought, maybe, just maybe, Karen would finally take the loss and move on. I should have known better. Later that evening, I heard a loud knock at my door. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing on my porch. For a split second, I thought Karen had somehow convinced them to arrest me, but their expressions were more exhausted than accusatory. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions," one of them said. I crossed my arms. "Let me guess. Karen." The officer sighed. "She's claiming you stole her vehicle and had it illegally scrapped." I fought the urge to laugh. "I didn't steal anything. The car was parked in my garage without permission, and I followed city protocol to have it removed." The second officer flipped through his notepad. "You filed an abandonment report?" I nodded. "And I have security footage of her parking it there, ignoring warnings, and refusing to move it. You're welcome to check." The officers exchanged a look before one of them pulled out a small tablet. I led them inside, pulled up the footage, and let them watch as Karen repeatedly blocked my garage, ignored my requests, and finally left her car sitting there for days. When the video ended, the first officer rubbed his temple. "Well, this is a mess." The second officer sighed. "Technically, the removal was legal. She should have moved it when warned." "So I'm not being arrested?" I asked, smirking. The first officer shook his head. "No. But she's probably going to try and take this to civil court." "She's welcome to try," I said. "She has no case." The officers left, probably regretting their career choices, and I closed the door with a satisfied grin. Karen had played her final card, and it had failed. She had no legal ground to stand on. The realization must have hit her hard because, for the next week, she was unusually quiet. No more stomping around. No more passive-aggressive encounters. It was as if she had finally accepted defeat. Then, one morning, I noticed something strange. A moving truck parked in front of her house. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe a delivery, maybe a renovation project. But as the day went on, I watched as workers carried out furniture, packed boxes, and loaded everything into the truck. My curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped outside just as Karen was overseeing the process. She spotted me, and for a moment, I expected her to launch into another tirade. Instead, she just glared. "So, you're moving?" I asked, feigning innocence. She huffed. "Not because of you." I raised an eyebrow. "Of course not." She crossed her arms, shifting uncomfortably. "This neighborhood is full of toxic people anyway. I need a fresh start." I bit back a laugh. "Sure. That's the reason." She narrowed her eyes. "I hope you're happy." "Oh, I am," I said, smiling. "More than you'll ever know." She didn't say another word. She turned on her heel, marched back toward the moving truck, and barked orders at the workers. I watched as they packed up the last of her belongings, slammed the truck doors shut, and drove off. Just like that, she was gone. I stood there for a long moment, letting the reality sink in. The nightmare was over. No more blocked driveways. No more entitled nonsense. No more Karen. To celebrate, I threw a small gathering for the neighbors who had suffered under her reign of terror. It was a simple affair: grilled burgers, cold drinks, and the shared relief of knowing we were finally free. The air felt lighter. The street felt quieter. A few days later, I received a call from Frank. "Hey, buddy," he said, sounding amused. "Just thought you'd like to know. Karen tried to get her car back." I perked up. "Oh? How'd that go?" "She showed up at the junkyard, demanding we return it," he chuckled. "But, well, it was already scrapped. Completely dismantled." I let out a low whistle. "Damn. Bet she loved that." "Oh, she went ballistic," Frank said. "Threatened to sue me, the city, everyone. But at the end of the day, the paperwork was solid. She had no case." I grinned. "That's beautiful." "She left screaming," Frank continued. "Said she'd make sure I never ran a business again. Then she got in a taxi and drove off. Funniest thing I've seen in years." I laughed. "Thanks for the update, Frank. You're a legend." "Anytime," he said. "And hey, if you ever need another car to disappear, you know who to call." I hung up, shaking my head. It was over. Completely, fully over. That night, I parked my car in my garage for the first time in months. It felt like a victory lap. As I stood there, looking at the empty space where Karen's SUV had once sat like an unwanted guest, I couldn't help but smile. Some battles are won with patience. Some are won with strategy. And some are won with a well-placed tow truck.